I'm 78 years old now. I say that out loud sometimes just to hear it land, because inside I still feel like I'm waiting for something to begin. Most days are quiet. The house holds its breath with me. And lately, when I sit at the kitchen table in the early light, I keep thinking about a question I finally asked myself when I was 42. One I had been stepping around for years like a loose floorboard I didn't want to test. Back then, 42 felt old to me. Not elderly, not yet afraid of stairs or silence, but old enough to sense that time had started leaning forward. I remember looking at my hands and noticing they weren't the hands I had grown up with. They were capable hands, useful hands, hands that had done what they were supposed to do, and still, something in me felt unfinished. At 78, I understand now that unfinished feeling never goes away. You just learn to live beside it. These days, time feels different. It doesn't stretch. It settles. Mornings come whether I'm ready or not. Nights arrive early and stay longer than they used to. People I loved are names now, not voices. I spend a lot of time remembering things I didn't know were important while they were happening. That question I asked at 42 didn't come all at once. It didn't arrive dramatically. It had been circling me for years, tapping lightly on my shoulder when I was busy, waiting patiently for a moment when I was tired enough to listen. I was good at staying busy. In my 20s, I told myself I was building a life. That's what everyone said you were supposed to do. Build something solid, something respectable. I worked. I showed up. I learned how to smile in meetings and keep my doubts quiet. I married a good man, not a cruel man, not an unkind one, just a man who wanted the same things everyone said we should want. We had conversations about the future that sounded responsible. Jobs, savings, later. Everything important was always scheduled for later. I don't remember ever stopping to ask myself if I wanted the life I was carefully assembling. I assumed wanting came after. That fulfillment was a reward for patience. In my 30s, I became very capable. I knew how to juggle things. I could manage a household, a career, expectations. I learned the art of postponement. If something felt uncomfortable, I told myself it was temporary. If I felt lonely, I blamed exhaustion. If I felt restless, I called it ambition. People said I was doing well. That mattered more to me than I realized. There were moments, small ones, when the question nearly broke through. Standing alone in the grocery store aisle, unable to remember what I came for, sitting in my car after work, engine off, just breathing, watching other women laugh too loudly at lunch and wondering if they knew something I didn't. But I always found a way to move on. Dinner needed making. Emails needed answering. There was always something practical to tend to. The damage didn't come from one bad decision. It came from 1,000 reasonable ones. I stayed in a marriage that slowly turned quiet because nothing was technically wrong. We stopped asking each other real questions. We became efficient partners, polite, predictable. I told myself that was maturity. I stayed in a job that drained me because it paid well, and people relied on me. I told myself work wasn't supposed to be enjoyable. That fulfillment came from stability. I stayed silent when I should have spoken because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I didn't want to disrupt the careful balance I had created. Years passed like that. Not dramatically, just steadily. Then, at 42, one afternoon changed the way the question sounded. I was sitting alone in my office after everyone had gone home. The lights were harsh, the air stale. I had stayed late for no real reason. I remember opening a drawer to look for a pen and finding an old photograph instead. I don't even remember what the picture was of now, just that it was from a time when my face looked softer, less guarded. I sat there longer than I meant to, and the question finally formed clearly, without apology. Is this the life I am willing to keep living if nothing changes? Not the life I hoped would happen later. Not the life I imagined might still arrive. This one, exactly as it was. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt something colder than fear, a kind of recognition. The honest answer came faster than I expected. No. But knowing that didn't mean I knew what to do next. The truth is, clarity doesn't always lead to action. Sometimes it just makes the waiting more painful. I told myself 42 wasn't too late, that I still had time, that I could make adjustments gradually. I didn't need to blow anything up. I could change things carefully, responsibly. So I made small changes that didn't threaten anyone. I read more. I took walks alone. I said no to a few extra commitments. I felt proud of myself for that. But I didn't ask for what I really needed. I didn't risk disappointing people. I didn't leave the marriage. I didn't change the work that was slowly hollowing me out. I told myself I was being practical, mature, patient. Years went on. My husband and I eventually separated, not with anger, but with exhaustion. By then there was nothing dramatic left to say. We sat at the table and spoke kindly, like people closing a long account. I don't blame him. We both stayed too long because leaving felt harder than enduring. The job ended later than it should have. I stayed until I felt invisible there, until my experience was praised but my ideas were ignored. I told myself loyalty mattered. I didn't realize how much of myself I was trading away for it. There was no single turning point that saved me, only moments that clarified what had already been lost. One of them came in my early 60s when my mother died. I was sitting beside her bed, holding a hand that no longer felt like my mother's. She was smaller than I remembered, quieter. The room smelled like antiseptic and flowers people had brought because they didn't know what else to do. She opened her eyes once and looked at me, really looked, and for a moment it felt like she wanted to tell me something important, but didn't have the strength to shape it into words. After she was gone, I stayed in that room alone. I remember thinking how much of her life I didn't really know, how much of her had been swallowed by responsibility, by being needed. I wondered for the first time without defensiveness if that was what I had been practicing my whole life, being needed instead of being known. That was when the weight of the question finally settled fully in my chest. How many more years do I get? And what am I willing to spend them on? By then the options were fewer, not gone, but narrower. Time doesn't slam doors. It just quietly removes handles. I made changes, but they were gentler than the ones I would have made at 42 if I had been braver. I lived alone. I worked less. I filled my days with routines that felt safe. I told myself peace was enough. Some days it was. Other days I felt the echo of all the conversations I never had, the risks I didn't take, the version of myself I kept waiting to become. Now, at 78, the question doesn't scare me anymore. It just sits with me. I see clearly how often I chose approval over honesty, how often I assumed there would be more time to explain myself, to change direction, to be fully present with the people I loved. I didn't fail dramatically. I delayed quietly. There are things I'm grateful for: a warm home, a life that never collapsed, moments of genuine joy that still surface unexpectedly. I don't dismiss those, but gratitude and sorrow can live in the same room. I know that now. Sometimes I think about the woman I was at 42, sitting alone in that office. I want to tell her that the question she finally asked was the right one, that asking it earlier wouldn't have destroyed her life, that it might have saved parts of it. I want to tell her that comfort can be its own kind of trap, that being reasonable isn't the same as being alive. If this resonates with you in any way, if you hear your own quiet thoughts echoing in mine, you don't have to do anything about it right now. But you're welcome to sit with it. And if you feel like sharing your thoughts, even just to name them out loud, I think that matters more than people realize. There's only one life lesson I'm sure of now, and it isn't dramatic. It's this: don't confuse waiting with wisdom. Waiting feels safe, but it still costs you time. And time is the one thing that never circles back to check if you're ready. As for me, I sit here now, listening to the clock in the other room. I make tea. I watch the light change on the wall. I let myself remember without rushing past the ache. This is the life I have left, and I'm finally living it with my eyes open.